Well, hello, y'all, and welcome back. It is another week of F1 racing, the second race of a triple header coming up in the Principality of Monaco. But before we get on to that and talking about everything that is going to entail this race weekend, let's talk about my thoughts on the Imola Grand Prix. Starting to kick off the European leg of the season, and of course doing my best to try not to crash around a very tough circuit to drive when I'm not talking. And, there's a chance I'll hit a wall or two here or there. But, as usual, we will go from the race results top to bottom, working down, and around a track that was very difficult to overtake in Imola. Max Verstappen with a very good lap in that Red Bull to put it on pole, or not on pole, but to put it on the front row, sorry, and had an incredible move into turn one, or well, technically turn two, to get by Oscar Piastri and take the lead and then control the race from there. Basically, that whole opening stint on the mediums, I was watching his lap times, and it was just metronomic. 21.2, 21.2, 21.3, 21.2. He was just managing the pace exactly the whole way. Obviously, that race was always going to be about preserving that first set of tires and not pushing because of the difficulty there is in overtaking unless you could build a good tire offset, which we did start to see towards the end and did see with Piastri a little later on. But on the other side of the Red Bull garage, not quite the result that we'd want from Yuki Tsunoda. Did quite well to bring it in, bring it all the way into the points from a pit lane start. But Yuki is still kind of having to play the hero in order to try and qualify near Max. I think he's going to kind of learn the lesson that Perez had to learn, where you can't try and beat Max by being Max. You got to find, your own way, and it may put you a little bit off of him. You may not be able to quite reach the lofty heights that Verstappen can in the same car, but you can maximize your own results by getting a setup that works for you and getting comfortable in the car and not going full hero mode. So good on Yuki there for getting into the points around, like I said, you can't really overtake around the track, but good strategy from him, and well-timed safety cars definitely got him up into the points-paying positions. The Red Bull, I think it was really important for them to get into the lead for Verstappen because of the overtaking difficulty, and that did allow him to just kind of control the pace. Next up, we'll head down McLaren. Oscar Piastri with a pole position. A good qualifying lap from him to get ahead of Verstappen. I can't fault Piastri too much for his choices into Tamburello on lap one. George Russell got an amazing launch, so he had to cover him off and box him in. Verstappen actually kind of did pretty good to help him out with that. And based on where Verstappen was when they hit the brakes, Verstappen just absolutely nailed the estimation of the braking zone on, start of the race tires. Heavy fuel, it's always a little bit of a gamble. Full fuel tanks, tires are at some temperature because you can try and heat them up to what you want pulling up to the grid, but the time you spend sitting on the grid waiting for the rest of the cars to pull up, if they, get to their grid boxes fast, then you're able to, preserve some heat. You have no idea. So it is a little bit of a crapshoot, and then obviously applying the brakes when you do get to that position into Tamburello, knowing how much you had. You had the tighter line, having to cover off George, so it was tough. And after that, he kind of had to settle into following. He was one of the cars that took the early pit stop to get off the mediums, which ended up being really, it wasn't the right call. I don't think it was ever going to be the right call. He did have about 6 seconds of clear air that he pit into, but it was very quickly ate up, and he had to make his way past about 7 or 8 cars before he was the car behind Verstappen again. And at that point, he really did not gain anything from an undercut. Lando Norris, on the other hand, was able to take those medium tires the long way, and that became crucial in what ended up resulting in Lando finishing ahead of Oscar in the Grand Prix. Now, I think at the early stages, Oscar was kind of on the radio saying, I don't think the tires can make it, can't do the distance. I'm going to put, and a lot of people will put that, as being it's definitely a factor for why the team called him in at that stage. But I think at that point, especially with the way that race was developing, and you saw they knew what they were doing knew to do it with Norris. I think the team needs to be a little firmer with Oscar, and at that point say, everybody's going through the same things. It's a tire preservation race. There's no good window to pitch you in. It's not, tough it out. Because he was still maintaining his lap times. Now, was he, taking too much out of the tires to do it? I don't know. But I think there was a missed opportunity there, and of course, all ended up with that towards the end. I do think, again, McLaren had a bit of a strategic misstep, because after that last safety car, you had Piastri on very old tires. Because he could not pit for new tires, he basically used up all the tires he had. And then you ahead of Norris, who was on fresh tires. I think the team needs to make that swap ASAP. I understand the risk of the cars behind, but I think you can orchestrate it around a track like Imola, where it is tougher to overtake. But I think that essentially by the time Norris passed Piastri organically, Verstappen was 6 seconds up the road, and there was really never going to be an opportunity to challenge for the win at the ending stage. But I think regardless of that, I think even if you put Piastri on fresh tires right behind Verstappen, who did have the opportunity to take fresh tires of his own, I don't believe that I think that win was squarely in Verstappen's hands. The car seemed to be performing very well in the Red Bulls for him, and they seem to have kind of figured some things out with the setup direction. We'll see if that continues. And McLaren didn't quite seem to have the massive tire wear advantage that they had been having for so long. So I think essentially Oscar's side of the garage did not execute as well as they could have, Oscar in the car, and it cost Oscar some points. He still got the championship lead, but it is going to be important for him to kind of figure that out as well as the team to tell him, nope, you got to manage your tires. Just everybody's going through the same pain. Just suffer through it. Next down the list, we've got Ferrari finishing in a nice P4 position with Lewis Hamilton. Weekend definitely started off in a bad way, though. Both Ferraris out in Q2 after a couple weeks of being under pressure from midfield teams, and then they show up and at a home race out in Q2. Really not a great look for them. They did run the strategy well for Hamilton, that reverse strategy that he seems to be quite fond of. I think he's done it most of the races, where he starts on the harder compound, then goes to the softer compound later in the race. And got himself up into a good P4 finish. Obviously, the safety car helped him out. The second safety car, I think, helped him out more. He was basically right in the window, but it did mean that the second safety car did mean he had an extra set of tires to put on right at the end, whereas Leclerc fell to the same strategy that Oscar Piastri did. And I think for Leclerc, the race could have gotten a lot worse if that second safety car hadn't come out. He was going to be in quite a lot of trouble trying to stretch those hard tires to the end of the race and already behind some cars. So it seems like that Ferrari really struggling in qualifying. Of course, I'm recording this here after the first two practices in Monaco, and the Ferrari looked quick in quali sims in FP2. So we'll see if they can bring it out for Monaco. Charles, very good driver around this track. But the race pace still seemed good for the car compared to everybody around him. So maybe they just need to sort out some of their qualifying woes, getting the car, and they're having trouble getting the car switched on maybe into pure performance mode for qualifying. But Obviously, you've got Monaco, you've got Spain, and just a lot of other tracks around the calendar where qualifying is going to be the premium. Overtaking is going to be the harder thing to do in the race. So they need to sort that out if they are going to try and challenge anywhere up the grid and do anything better than recovery drives. Williams next up. Alex Albon, a very strong P5 finish, a good day for him in the race. Managed to take that kind of leading strategy. Did well. Carlos Sainz, not quite as good of a day, obviously hindered by the battle that he had to do at the tail end with Leclerc, which benefited Hamilton. But overall, Williams still looking to be a very competitive car, and it's starting to look that way at a variety of tracks. I mean, the Williams is a pretty quick car just by its year-on-year tendencies, a pretty quick car in a straight line. But, I mean, even with change of direction in Imola, it showed some promise. So we'll see if that car continues to develop and look good. I mean, Williams is kind of one of those teams to look out for throughout the season. Let me just check my notes, make sure I'm not missing anything. Yeah. But yeah, double points finish for them. And it'll help out in that case because of how well they're qualifying, unlike Ferrari, where if they're qualifying well around tracks where it's hard to overtake, it helps earn them some points. Next up, the latest we've ever talked about this team so far this season, Mercedes, was definitely their roughest weekend so far. I mean, a lot can be said with George Russell qualifying P3. So, I mean, quali pace, quickness of the car is there, but we did see in a pretty warm weekend in Imola that the performance seemed to fade away in race trim, and it does look like there is a little bit of that tendency that we saw last year where that Mercedes can be very sensitive to temperatures, gain a lot from the cool temperatures, but hot temperatures seems to fall away. Of course, rough day for Kimi Antonelli, was already kind of falling back a bit, but then the DNF that took him out of the race, one of his home races, and to have to park it up with a bunch of people in attendance and not get to the end of it is always going to be a bummer. So tough day for Kimi Antonelli. Hopefully we can see him bounce back. He didn't quite have the qualifying performance we would expect out of him either, but I expect we'll have to kind of keep an eye on that car as we go out through the season and see what the weather is like at each circuit. Next up, the Racing Bulls, the RB team. Isaac Hadjar continues to have a bit of a stranglehold on that team's performance overall. Got himself into Q3 while Liam Lawson out in Q1 again in the same car. He had a really quiet race, but brought home some points. It was a P9 finish, I want to say, for Isaac Hadjar. Meanwhile, Liam Lawson not so much involved in the race here. So it's a little hard to tell what the quality of that RB car is, how good of a car it is. We got a little bit of a glimpse of it at the early stage of the season with what Yuki Tsunoda was able to do with it. But when you have, two very young drivers, one a true rookie, the other, Liam Lawson, driven basically half of an F1 season before starting this one, it's hard to say if they are getting everything out of the car, to have that measuring stick to see is, Isaac Hadjar getting everything he can out of that RB car, or is that RB car much better and it's just making his job easier to get up the field like that. Oh, here's my first send off. So it does look, though, that the car has the potential to be in the points week in, week out, regardless kind of track setup, which is good considering how tight that top 10 can be when you factor in Williams looking to be there. Next up, we'll head to a team that was very unlucky, I would say, this week, especially with both drivers caught out on the strategy. Aston Martin. They brought some upgrades to Imola, and I know in previous previous iterations of the preview. Talked a lot about, are they just kind of writing off the season until Adrian Newey gets there for the 2026 car. The upgrades that they brought to Imola look to work pretty decently. I mean, a double Q3 appearance from them. And, you know, the kind of innate cleverness that we've seen from this outfit, even all the way back to like the Force India days, to go on medium tires in Q2 and Q3 was an interesting choice, and it seemed to benefit them. You know, both drivers in the top 10, Alonso up as high as P5 in qualifying, but like I said, they're let down by some bad luck in the race. The safety cars pretty much caught them at the worst time every time, and so they ended up falling outside of the points. We saw Alonso challenge for a race win in Monaco a couple of years ago. Obviously, the Aston Martin was a much better car at that phase, but he knows how to get his way around, and if the Aston Martin is trending towards a good car in qualifying, I think there's an opportunity for them as this season progresses to maybe get off kind of the bottom rungs there. Alonso, surprisingly, no points yet this year, shows what his luck has been like. Lance Stroll, I think, has 14. But we'll see as the season develops. They are one of the teams that I don't expect them to be quite like Williams or RB, where they're going to start to transform into fighting 4 points every week, but I think you will see some good performances pulled out by that driver. I mean, Alonso is Fernando Alonso, and Lance Stroll does, in spite of all the jokes about him, he does occasionally just pull out this wild performance that makes him look like a world beater. So we'll keep an eye on Aston Martin as the season progresses, especially when we hit the European leg of the year. Next down the list, we've got Sauber. And it's going to be kind of similar. Gabriel Bortoleto, good performance to get himself into Q2. But with how crowded the top 10 is in car performance, I think it's going to be real hard to judge what that Sauber is all about. They do, unlike RB, have a good measuring stick of a driver in Nico Hülkenberg, at least to be able to see what Gabriel Bortoleto is all about. I know last week I said he's going to have to kind of show something to start to secure his potential seat. Out-qualified Nico at Imola. He did fall back through the field during the race, and they kind of swapped positions. So Gabriel Bortoleto still lots to learn in race pace, but he's showing those flashes of performance there. And unlike his foes on the grid in Alpine and RB, it does look like Gabriel Bortoleto is locked in, not really worrying about his seat over the course of this season. So he should be able to develop, show what he's got as they go. Alpine next up. Franco Colapinto's first weekend in the car with Alpine, of course, and it wasn't great. It left quite a bit to be desired. Crashing qualifying definitely did not help him out, and his race pace was meh at best. But the Alpine, it's starting to look like those couple heroic performances that Gasly put in early in the season are not going to be the norm. That car definitely looks to be falling back into the field in that kind of back mid-pack pretty consistently. We'll see what Alpine can do with the young Colapinto in the car if they give him the opportunity. I mean, of course, there's always drama with Alpine. Flavio Briatore coming out and saying, who said we were only giving him 5 races, when literally the announcement from Alpine's social media was 5 races. So who knows who's in charge, what they're doing over there at Alpine. They're kind of a mess. Pierre Gasly doing well to keep his head down. And Franco Colapinto just needs to show what he did in his first few races with Williams before he became crash happy in those last few races. Unfortunately, he's kind of started crash happy already by putting a car into the barriers on teams that don't want to be spending that extra money. And then we've got Haas, which probably for a team that was looking to fight for points at the early stage, that might have been one of the worst weekends they could have possibly had out here in Imola I mean, back of the grid in qualifying, back of the grid in the race, didn't really make any kind of big impressions. Was really hoping that we were going to see that kind of Toyota investment pay itself off a bit this year. There has been some reports of, off-track investment and upgrades, both in their pit wall, in their motorhome facilities, and that sort of thing. Big upgrades and big money being spent off the track for the team to utilize. The real question, kind of reaffirms a bit of a commitment from Gene Haas, the team owner, that he is putting that kind of money into those sorts of things, whereas in years past he's been pretty stingy. But the real question is, are we going to see any dividends from those kinds of upgrades? Are we also going to see upgrades specifically related to the car and car performance, or is this just kind of getting everything set and ready for a focus on the 2026 season? So, big questions for the American outfit. And of course, they do, in 2026, lose something innately by no longer being that American team on the grid with Cadillac entering. It kind of impugns on their territory there a bit. But that's what we have to say about Imola. Let's take a look now, as we've been working our way around the iconic city streets of Monaco. We'll get to the start of the lap and give you that nice little lap walk around of a track that's going to be very important on Saturday. I would say don't typically get your hopes up on Sunday for something amazing, unless it's raining, in which case it does get kind of crazy. But Monaco, as you've kind of seen, close walls all around, very tough to get around the circuit. I believe it's in inside P1. It is. Okay, so let's get in position here. And, of course, not long runs really anywhere. Let's get some power up here. So, drop the clutch. You've got the inside, and it's a pretty short run to the braking zone of Sandoval here. So, corner sticks out quite a bit. You've got a bit of runoff on the left, but otherwise that left barrier really closes in, especially at speed. And as cars are trying to file in 2x2 at the start, you get very tight. And then you head up the hill where the walls are going to kind of squeeze in on you, moves the track to the left, moves it back to the right. So we've seen that if you're kind of picking a straight line, you'll run out of room for cars to the side of you. So we saw the big crash last year with Sergio Perez, was basically just ran out of space. As you get to the top of the hill, a blind crest and entry into Mirabeau, this long left-hander, where you're really going to need cars, you're going to see them get into their single file line basically by the stage on lap 1. If they haven't sorted out by now, it's real hard to get Casino, this right-hander, and that is going to head you down the hill. So there's this big hump here. You'll typically see drivers swerve way to the right, go around this hump, even though the ideal racing line would stay on the left. So when you see drivers kind of taking that move, and you'll see me do it when I go through the faster laps, that's why. There's a big hump that upsets the car, so it's better to make the move. Next, you have this right-hander whose name escapes me at the moment. Another big opportunity for locking up. As you can see, the track on the right side falls away, and when you're at speed, you typically see this front right tire locking up. Let's see if I can get it hovered. But you can literally, with how stiff the cars are, this front inside tire will lift off the ground as they're turning in and braking, so you'll actually see that tire lock up but not produce the smoke that you would typically see of a lockup very often. Then you're into one of the more famous corners on the season's calendar, this Lowe's or Station Hairpin, and this is why everybody brings a custom steering rack, because the cars do not have enough steering lock in their usual configuration to make that corner. They actually need extra steering lock, especially with how long the cars have gotten. Then you exit this kind of middle section, and you're on your way, a little short blast to Portier, which is a real important corner, especially getting on the power, because as you head through the tunnel and on your way down to the Nouvelle Chicane, there is a, albeit very slim, overtaking opportunity. It's one of the longer full throttle sections here, which is not saying very much. But you can attempt to make a big dive on somebody into the chicane. Obviously, the barriers close in very tight. You're typically, if somebody's making a move and they don't get to stick, you'll see them kind of cut across that runoff and try and get through. But it's an overtaking opportunity, but not much of one unless we see some significantly different tire life strategies going on. I wouldn't expect to see much by way of movement there. Then you're on the quick run to the left-hander of Tabak. Very famously, guys like Ayrton Senna said, you turn in and you plan for the car to understeer to miss that inside wall. And you just kind of trust that the car will grip when it does and slide when it does. After that, you're through the very fast swimming pool chicane. A left, right, right, left. You hit the brakes to slow down for the second portion. And watch that large inside curb. We saw Lewis Hamilton take to the skies going over it today. If you get too much of the inside, that's typically going to put you right into the barriers on the right if you take too much of that tall curb. Then you're into the final two corners. La Rascasse, named for the restaurant on the inside apex of the corner. Very tight right-hander. And then that's got your pit entry right on the right side. And then Anthony Nose, which is the final corner. And then you're opening up the DRS for the only DRS zone of the circuit. And it's not a very long one. You got to try and get as good of a run as you can to try and make any kind of overtaking move happen. So we'll go around the track a little quicker and you can see the way the walls move in and out. Then once you're at the top on Mirabeau, fighting the understeer of the car, get it switched back. And here we go. Avoid that big bump. Find a braking zone for the right-hander. Get the car rotated tight to the wall. And now really get the car slowed down for the hairpin. Taking a little bit of curb there, you'll typically see drivers avoid that. And then too much right foot, and I've clipped the wall. And now the car really doesn't like me. So, not a great start to that lap. But then you're out of Poitiers, and you can see the speed build up. This right-hander flat out. You keep your foot pinned to the floor, and then hard on the brakes. You can see me actually locking up the fronts. I've got very high front brake bias right now just because rear locking is a pain, especially when you're trying to do multiple things. To back, you can see foot flat to the floor through the first part of swimming pool, then on the brakes into the next part, around, and find somewhere. There's not a lot of references to brake for La Rascasse. We're a little bit deep there, and there we go. So we'll keep the pace up a little bit as I talk tires and tire strategy. So last week out at Imola, we saw the first opportunity of the C6 compound to go around, and as we saw with the Aston Martins, it did look like the C6 struggled with overheating. It might have been part of just the temperature of Imola, but it was starting to fall off towards the end of qualifying laps. Now, if we will see the same here around Imola, will be interesting, but we've gone a softer compound. Typically we see the C543. Now we have the 654 setup going for this year's Monaco Grand Prix. Typically, Monaco is all about the medium hard one stop. You can actually pretty much pit on lap 1 or 2 in previous years, put on the hards and kind of go to the end of the race. And it was basically, unless it's a free pit stop, you're never coming into the pits. Big change this year, and an actual one-off rules change, is that 2 changes of tire will be mandatory here in Monaco. So usually the rule is you must run 2 dry compounds, one of which is the medium and one of which is the hard. Otherwise you can do whatever. Now you must make 2 changes. I don't know the specific details of what compounds. I believe as long as you satisfy the normal compounds rule of having run at least 1 of the required compounds. So you could, in theory, go soft, medium, or soft, hard. But it'll be interesting to see what teams think of in order to work their way around it. I wouldn't be surprised, especially based on kind of the tire life we've seen out of the soft compound in practice, it looks like the hard, the old medium, can do a pretty significant portion of this race. Even having gone, to the softer compounds. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see some teams doing, making 2 pit stops within the first 10 laps and just going to the end of the race. Additionally, we've seen quite a few crashes and red flags in practices already today. So maybe teams will instead decide to try and bank on a red flag to cover one of their stops, because it's a pretty slow pit lane, and as you can see around the track, there's not a lot of space around the walls, and it's just about impossible to overtake. There's one of those wide moments. So Saturday is usually the more interesting day for Monaco. We'll see what kind of qualifying results people will pull out. The McLaren battle is always going to be interesting to see if Norris can start making his way back into the championship fight, or if Piastri starts to put his stamp on it. I mean, this is race 8 of the season. We're getting close to that halfway point, and Verstappen is hanging around, winning races. So it is likely that McLaren will have to make some choices later in the season and kind of choose which driver they want to put their efforts behind. But of course, home race for Charles Leclerc as well always goes well around here and looked very good in practice. The Ferraris actually looked pretty good in practice overall. So we will have to see what Saturday brings and what Sunday brings. I don't believe there's any expectation of weather or rain to throw a wrench into it, but the 2 pit stop strategy is going to have its own impacts, and there's plenty of flexibility in the tire life for teams to make their choices. But as always, thank you guys for joining me once again. Middle part of a triple header. I think we got Spain next week, which is also going to be interesting. That's typically where we're going to see teams bring lots and lots of upgrades. The teams that didn't bring upgrades to Imola, we'll see even more in Spain. So I will catch you guys next time. Peace.